YNW Melly back in court today. His attorney saying the state has not given enough evidence to this point to keep
prosecutors to share why Melly shouldn't be free, or he's letting him out, which had Charleston white in disbelief. The YNW Melly, I'm so happy he in jail get mistreated. Yeah, I'm so happy he in jail getting mistreated, homie. Oh, homie, when you take a life, homie, you ain't gotta looking angry without a haircut. However, his mood changed once the judge mentioned a potential release from jail, reporting Melly has to make an informed decision about who he wants as his lawyers. He's been sitting in our jail for over 2,100 days. No, but let me repeat myself, Mr. Diones has to make an informed decision about who he wants.
The YNW Melly, I'm so happy he in jail getting mistreated.
Melly's team asked for at least a day or two to decide, telling the judge they'd have an answer by tomorrow. The judge was surprised Melly had been behind bars since February 2019, so he told the prosecutor to prepare a document explaining why Melly shouldn't get a bond. But as usual, the prosecutors are looking into something else. They're now investigating one of Melly's lawyers, Raven Liberty, for witness tampering in an effort to delay the bond hearing. This comes as Melly waits for his retrial. Concerning is that his lawyer may not be getting investigated, and this is just another way for them to delay Melly's trial. Although Melly's lawyers tried to help in getting a bond, they brought up how Melly texted his ex-girlfriend when the crime was going down, with Melly's phone revealing he was texting about running away from men on the street. That would be the part he said that someone just SH'd the car up and was trying to shoot them, so I asked him if he was okay where he was, and he's like, there's a car. He was acting like someone was following him, hiding and looking around. He said, yeah, I think they're still out here or something. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was. Then I asked where Sack and Juvie were, and he told me he wasn't sure. Maybe they were in the car. Based on the way he texted, it seemed like the drive-by was real and happening in that moment. Another reason Melly should get a bond is that they never even found the firearm. He kept saying, I didn't have a gun, so I can't. He wasn't sure which one to use for his tests, so he couldn't create tests for disextermination because he didn't know what he was working with. But the prosecutors didn't back down easily. In court, they stood firm and told the judge that Melly wasn't just facing charges for taking out Sack Chaser and Juvie. He was also dealing with witness tampering charges, which could lead to a life sentence. They filed 6 new charges against Melly and 2 others, including tampering with a witness and directing others to do the same. Activities of a criminal solicitation or conspiracy to commit tampering and unlawful use of a two-way communication device. Now, a couple of those charges actually carry a life in prison sentence if there's a conviction. They believe Melly's been making calls from jail telling his ex-girlfriend to not testify, as Melly's ex-girlfriend Mariah knows the truth of what happened that night. Juvie's father looked into the witness, TING, and revealed how Melly communicated with Mariah. There was this kind of crazy.
So the first thing is I didn't have a firearm, so I can't know which firearm I'm going to use in order to replicate.
On the witness tampering charges alone, Melly faces a life sentence. With this information being released, it answers the question of why Melly's been treated so poorly inside of jail, because we heard Melly's mother talk about how Melly's phone and mail privileges were taken from him. My son has not been convicted of anything, and even other inmates that have been convicted or anything, they have the right to use a telephone. They have a right to just to be allowed to write letters to their loved ones, to receive their mail. They hold his mail, they don't give it to him. But if Melly used the phone to witness tamper, that's why he had the privileges taken from him, meaning they will likely have evidence of him trying to tamper with Mariah. But with Melly's situation in jail getting worse,
there was this kind of crazy way that Melly was communicating. He wasn't allowed to use the phone, but he was passing notes to people, and then
the judge really doesn't have much control over what happens in the jail. There was actually a hearing about how Melly's being treated, but the jail runs by its own rules, and it doesn't seem fair. They should be answering to someone too. Melly's case has really taken a toll on his mom. We saw Boozy step in to check on her and see how she was holding up. He said, she's real, bro. She's stressed out. I heard she had, yeah, she's real. He added, I'm reaching out to her, letting her know I'm here. He reached out to him because he's real. I reached out to him, bro. I met his mom, and she's a good woman. With Melly's case dragging on for so long, the The prosecutors put together a new file of evidence to make sure he wouldn't get a bond. They started talking about how Melly was close to King Von before his arrest and the crime. An O-Block member mentioned how they used to meet up, and after an argument with King Von, Melly went to him for advice on how to deal with issues he had with Sack Chaser and Juvie. Really tell you that Melly told him that he was two friends he ain't come out and say like we got into an argument. And so, if you know when people can say something without saying it, and so.
Did Vaughn really tell you that Melly told him that he was two friends?
He ain't come out and say, like, we got.
In the midst of the tension and drama surrounding Melly, Juvie, and Sack Chaser, it's clear there were issues within the YNW crew that reached far beyond just loyalty and friendship. The conflict, however, wasn't just about personal grudges, it was about money. Melly and Borton were the ones pulling in the majority of the cash for the group, and that didn't sit well with Juvie and Sack Chaser. Both Juvie and Sack Chaser, like many individuals in the music and street world, believed in the concept of equal shares. They wanted a 25% split. Despite not contributing as much as Melly and Borton, Melly wasn't about that. He knew the work he was putting in, and it didn't feel right to him to split the earnings equally when he was the one doing the heavy lifting. This situation brewed a significant amount of tension within the group, and anyone who understands the mentality of the streets knows that when money is involved, things can go from calm to chaotic in an instant. Now, if you understand the reputation of King Von in the streets, the advice he would have given Melly in a situation like this becomes somewhat predictable. King Von, a respected figure in Chicago's O-Block, wasn't known for backing down when it came to protecting what was his. He was strategic, tough, and aware of the realities of street life. It's easy to imagine that King Von would have told Melly to secure what's his and to never let someone else take what he worked for. This would have served as a perfect motive for Melly and Borton to keep the revenue to themselves, even if it meant taking extreme measures. When the prosecutors presented this evidence from Melly's phone, the case against him grew stronger. There was a chilling moment when a message exchange between Melly and a contact named PZ Gambino took place. PZ asked Melly if he was okay, and Melly responded nonchalantly, "I did that," followed by a smiling emoji. This response, along with the context surrounding it, painted a picture of someone who wasn't affected by the consequences of the actions that had just unfolded, someone who didn't show any remorse for what had happened. This was followed by more cryptic messages from Melly, which continued to add to the feeling that he wasn't too worried about the situation, at least on the surface. But it wasn't just the text messages that raised eyebrows. The next day, after the crime, Melly and Borton were seen dancing, looking more carefree than anyone would expect after such a major event. In fact, they weren't showing any signs of distress or sorrow at all. Instead, they were out, celebrating, carrying on like nothing had happened. This behavior seemed completely out of place, especially when you consider that someone had just lost their life. Melly, despite everything, was still turned, a term used to describe someone who is keeping up a positive and energetic vibe, even in tough circumstances. He was outwardly unfazed by the crime, showing a level of confidence and joy that many found unsettling. In the face of such a tragedy, his reaction seemed completely disconnected from the severity of the situation, but the most incriminating evidence, perhaps, came from the Jeep they were driving that night. Expert investigators analyzed the vehicle and shared their findings, and what they revealed was pivotal. It wasn't a drive-by shooting, as some had speculated. The experts concluded that whoever committed the crime was sitting in the back left seat of the vehicle. The positioning of the shots was key. 3 rounds were fired from the passenger's side back seat, suggesting a clear and deliberate target. This meant that the person responsible for the crime had to be within the vehicle, rather than firing from a passing car. The fact that the evidence pointed to someone inside the vehicle made the case against Melly and Borton even more damning. The sequence of events, the text messages, the lack of remorse, and the positioning of the shots all created a narrative that couldn't be ignored. When investigators pieced everything together, it became clear that this wasn't just some random act of violence. There was motive, there was planning, and the evidence seemed to support the idea that Melly and Borton were involved in a calculated act. This discovery wasn't the only piece of evidence that raised concerns. The investigators also took a hard look at the dynamics of the group and how the relationships between Melly, Juvie, Sack Chaser, and Borton had played out over time. The financial disputes, the jealousy, and the sense of entitlement from Juvie and Sack Chaser had created a perfect storm. When you add Melly's strained relationship with them and the fact that he and Borton were holding onto the lion's share of the money, it becomes easy to see how things could have spiraled out of control. While the defense might argue that Melly was simply defending himself or caught up in a chaotic situation, the prosecution presented a case full of circumstantial evidence that pointed in the other direction. They showed that Melly had ample opportunity to walk away from the situation or defuse the conflict. Instead, he allegedly chose a path of violence. The evidence didn't just suggest that Melly was involved. It suggested that he might have been the mastermind behind it all, making sure that the money stayed in his hands and out of the reach of those who felt they were entitled to a bigger share. In light of the evidence, the question remained, would Melly be granted a bond? Given the strength of the case against him and the nature of the charges, it seemed unlikely. The prosecutors had built a compelling argument, and with the new evidence surfacing, it was hard to see how Melly would be able to secure a release. At least in the near future. One of the most troubling aspects of the case was the lack of any real remorse for Melly. In the aftermath of the crime, he didn't appear to be worried about the consequences. The dancing, the carefree attitude, it all seemed to indicate someone who wasn't concerned about the lives affected by the crime. This lack of empathy, combined with the mounting evidence, painted a picture of someone who was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect what he saw as his. The legal battle ahead would be intense, but with each passing day, it seemed like the case against him was getting stronger. As the story continued to unfold, many questions remained unanswered. Was Melly truly the mastermind behind the crime, or was he just another pawn in a much larger game? Did he really feel no guilt, or was he simply trying to keep his composure in a high-stakes situation? And perhaps most importantly, would he be able to secure a bond in the face of the evidence stacked against him? Only time would tell, but as of now, it seemed like the road ahead for Melly was only getting more difficult. With the weight of the charges, the mounting evidence, and the lack of remorse on display, it seemed that his future was hanging in the balance.